Okay, so welcome everyone back from the break. And as I said on day one, at this convention, we're including two mini social media trainings for activists. The first was on Facebook, and now we're turning to Twitter. Given the activity of our current president, I don't think there is anyone left on the planet who hasn't heard of Twitter. So I'll skip over that and go right to introducing our speaker. Peter Orvetti lives in Washington, D.C., and is the Associate Vice President of Strategic Analysis for Cision, a public relations and communications firm. Peter does editing and media aggregation, which means that he analyzes and summarizes news so that it can be distributed to and understood by politicians, journalists, and others who need to know the bottom line on complex issues but may not have had the time or the wherewithal to research it for themselves. Peter has worked as a writer and editor for Mondial, which is our journal, our breaking news response team, and our social media team. Peter also recently launched a blog called the One World Digest, which presents news and analysis from a World Federalist perspective. And in a moment, I'll put the link to that in the chat box. Finally, I would be remiss to say, if I didn't tell you, that Peter is also an actor and a producer. So with that, I hand it over to Peter. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Bob. I think I have met virtually most of you. Bob summarized who I am fairly well. Um, in the spirit of both what I do as a news aggregator and the spirit of Twitter, which is a way of making thoughts very brief, this will be a very brief presentation and it'll be fairly open ended. I know there's some folks, Jane and some others, who have been very involved with our social media and Twitter, and please, anyone who wants to chime in with things I'm forgetting to say or with questions as we go, please feel free to do so. Um, if I could just, for the folks I see on the screen before I share my screen, show of hands, is there anyone here who is completely unfamiliar with Twitter other than recognizing the word? It seems like most folks have at least some very basic familiarity with Twitter. And as Bob said, Twitter has gotten a somewhat deserved negative reputation over the last 4 years because of its most famous user. Um, Twitter, I think, is both a horrible thing and an excellent thing. Uh, Twitter tends to amplify the loudest voices, the rudest voices, the most shocking voices. But Twitter is also very good at what was largely its original intention when it was created, which is a way for organizations and individuals to reach out to those within their direct sphere of interest. When Twitter was created, the company was not thinking of it as being this open-ended. Now they call it a global public forum. They thought of it more that it would be organizations, people who are well known, companies having a direct way of contacting and interacting with their clients and fans and customers. Not that it would be the sort of free for all that it's become. And it's that latter point that I think is the best way for a small but focused movement like ours to best utilize it. I'm going to try to share my screen, which is something I am not super familiar with. So please let me know if this does not work. Um, am I up now?
Yep,
Cool. Okay, so you see my Twitter feed there. Um,
yep.
all right, so when you log on to your account, you will come to your own feed, which, just like Facebook or anything else, are the people who are the accounts that you are following or connected to. Unlike Facebook, for the most part, if you go to Twitter, you can choose whomever you want to follow. Some accounts choose to only permit people that they approve to follow them, but for the most part, Twitter is open to anyone who you can follow whomever you want to and interact with whomever you want to. You are able to block or freeze out certain individuals, but for the most part, I highly recommend keeping your account open to anyone who wants to look at it, because that's the best way to interact with folks on Twitter. And I'm just kind of scrolling down very slowly the list of accounts that I follow, and you can see it's a lot of, oh, there's Donna there, a lot of big folks in our movement. The way that I use Twitter for One World Digest is every day when I post my briefing, which I usually do early in the day, I post the link of what I've just written, and I also find on Twitter the handles, just but handles being the name, the term of art for Twitter accounts. Mine being at One World Digest. They all start with the at symbol, and then within no spaces, just a basic title of the people who I've referenced in it or the organizations that I've referenced in it, which I do so they know that I'm writing about them. If you're writing about Donald Trump, if you're writing about Joe Biden, tagging them, which is, those are the terms used, is probably not going to be that worthwhile because lots of people tag them. But for smaller organizations, for activists within our movement, this is a good way to let them know that you're out there, that you're writing about them, and that you want to interact with them. Another thing that I do that I've recommended CGS and other folks do more often is what's called retweeting. Retweeting is when you share something that someone else has posted or written. Now, retweeting, I believe, is useful to us, in part to amplify the arguments of the people within our movement. You can say I have one from WFM here, from the UN, but also if you retweet people or organizations, it lets them know that you're retweeting them. If the CGS account, which is a very good account, but is not super active every day, if the CGS account were to retweet 5 things a day, that's letting 5 organizations know that we're out there and that we exist. And if activists who have their own accounts retweet things that CGS has written, that amplifies the CGS argument or what CGS is sharing. Another way of kind of amplifying your voice on Twitter, which I honestly do not use that often, is what are called likes. Now you'll see this little heart symbol here. If you like a tweet, boom, I just like that tweet, the heart lit up. It lets the person who tweeted it know that you have seen it, you've you're showing that you support the idea behind it. It does not retweet it. It does not appear on your account as being something that's been shared, but it does, it is a way of, again, letting other folks know that you are out there. At this point, before I go in deeper into anything further, just since I know we have different levels of activity, is there anyone who has any specific questions about how they can use Twitter, how they've used Twitter that I can get into before I kind of delve more into the weeds? Is this all making sense to folks at this point? I know I'm kind of throwing out a lot of information. The other end of Twitter, the interacting with other people with, I just got a retweet, just now Tad just, very helpfully liked a tweet that I posted. And when that was actually a helpful thing, because when someone does something with your account, you'll get a notification that someone liked it or they retweeted it or what have you. Twitter also, and this is kind of where we get into the do I have a, whoops, I got to insert chat. To usage, how do you mean usage? Just to clarify. Mario, I had a question about using, to hashtag usage. I'm sorry, that's
hashtag usage.
Yeah, hashtag, okay. Yeah, you'll see over here on this far side screen, this is what's happening. These are the so-called trending topics, and this is kind of what are being talked about on Twitter right now, a lot of stuff. It will somewhat select based on what your interests are and what you've shared, but it'll also just put out, like you'll see a lot of political stuff on mine because everything I do on Twitter is politics related. But you'll also see stuff about things in popular culture, in sports, in media. Like, someone's tweeting about, and there's a lot of tweets about Chadwick Boseman. A hashtag is basically, let me see this one here. If I were to write a post, I like pizza, and if I put a, I'll see Pizzagate comes up. I put a what they call a hashtag, which is basically a pound sign in front of it. When I share that tweet, it comes up like this on my tweet. It's a, and if I click on it, it's everybody who's talking about pizza at the moment, all the different things. So anyone who at the moment is searching for pizza right now will see my tweet. Now, they'll see it buried in the most cases beneath a lot of others because my account doesn't have a lot of followers. You're going to see, first of all, you see lots of pizza companies. If someone really famous was tweeting about pizza, hashtags, and so someone already liked it. See someone who I don't even know is just like, I like pizza too. So you can see very quickly people respond. There's some discussion about how useful it is for organizations like ours to widely use hashtags that aren't directly related to the issues at hand. I personally shy against it because there's a tendency on Twitter for folks who just want to be noticed and come on to see what's going on, to come on, see what sort of things are trending, and to just sometimes put a hashtag on their tweet that has nothing to do with what they're writing about because at the moment it's trending. Like if I were to write something about world federalism and hashtag it Chadwick Boseman because he happens to be trending at the time, that's considered bad Twitter etiquette. A lot of accounts will do that are just trying to get attention. Also, that's the way you're going to get pulled into lots of arguments with people who are not really looking for a serious discussion, but who are just kind of on Twitter seeking attention or to just find people to kind of mess around with. Hashtags can be very useful to track what's going on within a cause. If I look up, let me just tweet here. World Parliament is not going to have a lot of them. So I tweet World Parliament now. So now my tweet has gone out into the more rarefied universe of, you'll see a lot of these folks are folks that we know. This is a very effective way to use hashtags. And I recommend that we find some common ones to use, whether it's World Parliament, World Federalism, UNPA, because that way, not only will we be able to see what each other's writing, but we will find new supporters. And for people who are just discovering some interest in our movement, they'll be able to find us and reach out to us in that way.
So
What
Peter,
else
we were not monitoring the chat, but there is a question there which I'll read to you. What does it mean to pin a tweet, and how do you do it?
Pinning a tweet, that's mostly for your own use, or if you're a very well-known account, and I am going to go to Donald Trump's account for a moment, so be aware. Oh, he doesn't have one right now. But basically, a pinned tweet simply means if you're someone who tweets dozens of times a day and you're a well-known account, if someone opens your account, your tweet, that will be the tweet that always appears at the top of your feed. My own account, the One World Digest one, when I started the website on September 1st, I put the famous Tennyson quote that we all know as my first tweet, and I pinned it. And all this means is if you go to the One World Digest feed, the feed being the list of all the tweets, pretty much what you're going to see is reverse chronological order, the stuff I posted most recently. But at the very top, it will be the pinned tweet. You can have one pinned tweet. You can change them at any time. You can, what I picked on the current president for because he often has a tendency to, since he tweets so much in a day, to briefly pin something, whether it's an image or the thing he most wants people to be aware of, and change it regularly. So if you have an account that you're tweeting 10 times a day, 15 times a week, you might want to pin a tweet to the top. Pinning a tweet does not make it more visible to people who aren't looking directly at your feed, though. And generally, folks who go on Twitter don't open the feeds of the pages they're following. Most people on Twitter will spend most of their time on their own feed page. The feed page, which I have open here now, is just the accounts you're following. For me, I'm following these 75 accounts. So pinning a tweet is mostly just for your super fans.
Peter, can you show us very quickly how you pin a tweet? Where do
Sure.
you go?
I will just unpin it. Okay, so that tweet's unpinned. Now it's gone because it's from a long time ago. But if I wanted to say, okay, I'm going to pin this morning's edition of One World Digest, all I have to do is just, you can see these three little dots right next to your,
Yeah.
good, pin to your profile, pin it, and now it's at the top. That's it. Super simple.
Thank you.
Okay, Peter, we have one more question in the chat, which I'll read to you, and then I'll let everybody know that Peter will be available at the end of the session today in one of our breakout rooms, so people could ask more specific questions to him at that time. But the remaining question in the chat is from Chuck Woolery, who asks, what are some positive examples of Twitter making a progressive movement successful? It appears to be the greatest time suck ever invented. Useful? It was to Trump, and he used it to distract us from so many other things that we could have been doing or thinking about. Great place to hone debate skills and finding others who agree with you. I will add to that, Bill Pace responded by saying Black Lives Matter rallies is one example, and Brandon responded by saying the Sunrise Movement and March for Our Lives. But if you would address that too, and we'll have to wrap up for today then.
Those are very
And
good
Jane,
examples.
Jane
and,
said the
what Chuck
Me
is saying is
Too.
Oh,
very
the
Jane
Me-
true.
Petzoff said Me
Thank
Too.
you. Me Too movement as well.
Me Too is a very good example since that was a Twitter-based movement to a great extent. And what Chuck is saying is very true, which is why I say to some extent I'm very skeptical of Twitter. It's very easy for demagogues to use it. It's very easy to, it is, of all social media, I think the primary source of misinformation and disinformation and intentional deception. It is also a way for grassroots organization. Me Too, I think, is a great example. One BLM example, I'm in Washington, D.C., and as you all know, we've had many protests here. During the large round of protests in June, there was a situation where a bunch of police officers had kettled a group of activists in a row house. Basically, they chased folks down the street, and a sympathizer led all these people into his house, and they used Twitter throughout the night to let people know they were safe and what was going on, and to organize rides home. So I think besides being useful for these sort of macro movements like Me Too, the protests in Iran a few years ago were largely based on, that was largely spread since Twitter. It's also a way for this kind of little micro organization to let people know specifically what's going on in a smaller scale, which is why I do think Twitter is very helpful for a cause like ours, which is a cause with very committed people, but rather small numbers. And it's a way to amplify our voices by, that's why I say retweet, 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 comment on what others are sharing, because it's a good way to amplify smart, committed voices. Unfortunately, a lot of Twitter is cutting through very negative noise, but it can be used in a more positive way. And thank you for that question, and we'll speak to that some more in the breakout.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter. And again, you're invited to join him later on. So thank you. And thank you also for all your work with us so far and bringing your expertise to the movement.
Well, thank you.
So just taking a deep breath, everyone, and moving on.